Okay, I'm here. I'm just trying to get my Facebook password so I could get on the thread here. Never a dull moment. Let me find this real quick. Here we go. Never a dull moment. Facebook. Show. All right, here we go. Sign in. Get rid of that. Move that aside. I'm here. And then I have this here. Let me just, where's this thing? I haven't been on this computer in a while. I've become a laptop guy. It really helps. Okay. Do you hear me? Yes. Cool. Thanks, Roberta. All right. Looks like we're in the clear this week. Okay, I'm gonna move the chat over here so I can look directly at you guys. And where'd the other thing go? Close. Oh, here it is. And my book discussion. Bam! Look at that. Okay, so let's get on this. Everyone can hear me. Everyone's there. Everyone's refreshed. God, I feel like we've come a long way. So we're cool. Yeah, you have to hit play on the window. Cool. All right, I'm gonna get move on. All right. Questions from last week's discussion continue. Any follow-up points? I think we'll just go from there. As per last week, what if it's going on around you? People trying to engage you in it, like e.g. a spouse who tries to pull you in and gets you to engage. When do you not bite in? Do you not care? Are you apathetic? Or what are your suggestions here? Yeah, so this really boils down to good boundaries. And the problem I see with many of my patients, many of the students, many of the people I've engaged with over the years is, it's just the boundaries aren't there. So when the spouse is doing that thing, just be like, hey, you're trying to pull me into this thing and I'm just not interested. So if you're going to do that, I'm just going to go in the other room. And they'll test it and they'll test it and they'll test it. Boundaries, the best way to look at boundaries is look at a new puppy. They don't mean well, but they're testing you, right? And so they're gonna go over there and pee, and then you're like, no, puppy, no, puppy, no. And then they're like, They'll do it again to like see if that was a thing. And you're like, no, puppy, no. And the more consistent you are, the more they go, aha, I'm just not gonna pee here. And so a spouse who's gotten away with it for decades is less likely to give up ground and is less interested in giving up ground. So one of the things that you need to build into your understanding of all this stuff with energy transference is that sometimes it ain't going to be pretty, but you need to don't start a fight, but just be like, look, here's the deal. There's a new sheriff in town. I'm not interested in entertaining that, whatever that is. So let's just not go there. I'm not having this conversation with you. And if you're interested in doing this, then you can do it on your own. But this is not a conversation I want to have with you ever again. This doesn't serve me. This doesn't serve our marriage. This doesn't serve our life. And walk away or drive away or whatever, or hang up. And just don't turn it into a fight. Just lovingly say, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to feed this anymore. And it might take a day, it might take a week, it might take 6 months. but eventually they'll get it, and you'll both be the better for it. Page 51, thank you for the cup example. It brought the concept of how anticipation, grief, worry affect us. Sharp focus, great way to gently check in. Okay, you're welcome. Page 52, imagine that we have all been born as little holographic offshoots of the one flame. The energy of life is moving through us and naturally driving us to the fulfillment of our personal destinies. Who writes this stuff? Can you expand on the holographic offshoots analogy as it relates to our existence at this time, space, and place of our experiences? Cool. This is like deja vu. I totally talked about this last week, but none of you can hear me. So if you look at fractal mathematics, there's some very interesting pieces that correlate with, the hologram is basically, one piece of a hologram is all the hologram, and you could take one little splintered piece of a hologram and create the entire hologram there because it is an algorithm, right? And so that's where math and kind of hippie trippy quantum universe collide. And so there's some very interesting things that happen there. And part of that has to do with understanding that the sequencing of our DNA, 90-some-odd% of it is identical to the DNA of all the other life on this planet. And so we get closer and closer with the chimps, but life is encoded in every single cell of our bodies. And there's this very interesting array of communication networks that we're finding exist as the DNA zips and unzips, and it communicates with all the other DNA in our bodies, and with the bacterial DNA in our bodies, and also with some of the DNA outside of our bodies. And we're finding that sometimes there's some cue and some encoding that might be coming from the Big Dipper that might influence the way our DNA is encoded. And so all of this kind of like ancient cosmology meets horoscope meets personal unfolding and genomic epigenetic expression is all through this really interesting language of holographic communication that we're just starting to get like an inkling of an understanding of. And it is like Krishna's flute. I mean, there is some very interesting stuff that comes from us getting a better understanding of who we are and understanding that we're now very, very similar. And we're very, the differences are minute compared to similarities with all the life around us. So I hope that answers that question. Sorry, catching my breath. The Lucifer experiment. We give our shadow more energy until it contains more power than our conscious field. This is how I believe people are driven to participate in atrocities. So do you believe this is how evil is created? Is it evil or just mental aberration, in your opinion, or both? Okay, so I've encountered evil. I mean, I've done hundreds of exorcisms in my life, and there is evil out there. I do believe that it's also part of God's plan, and evil is there to show us the light and drive us towards the light and teach us where our strength comes in the light. But this is, this Lucifer experiment and how people, within the context of this page in this chapter and what we're talking about is as people become ignorant and feed energy into this bubble of aversion energy, which then becomes, kind of takes on a life of its own, that's where evil hedges its bet. That's where evil, just kind of like puts in its crowbar and starts wedging people. You'll see it. You'll see it in atrocities. You'll see it as, people start to go into grief and terror and say the Sudan or ISIS and all the stuff that they're doing. Evil is right behind it, because as people start to get into these really painful places of, you killed my sister or my mother, raped my wife in front of me, and they don't want to feel that pain and agony, evil comes right in and says, the righteous answer to this atrocity is another atrocity, right? And it becomes a parasitic meme that overwhelms and comes in and taps into this very powerful aversion energy and uses it towards another ends, which is to perpetuate more evil and create more suffering and kind of these negative spirals. So there's a lot to be learned from that. There's a lot to be gathered from that, and there's a lot to be used for us to go in and heal that. And so I feel like I could do an entire talk on that, and we could. But suffice it to say, we feed that shadow energy. There is no evil outside of the power we put into it. And even the disembodied evil that I've encountered in the world, and I'm sure many of you have encountered in the world, it's a ghost. And a ghost without a body doesn't have power, or very little power. And so if you learn to stay in the light and not feed vitality into whatever that consciousness it is, it doesn't have shit on you. It really doesn't. So learning how to stay in your light, how to stay in your power, and how to navigate in light is really the answer to all of that. And heal. You know, the great Lucifer experiment is to learn who we are. Lucifer, being God's brightest angel, took a fall and said, look, I'm going to play bad guy so that I can have a counterpoint to this. I can drive them to understanding who they are by taking away all that's good and giving them, you know, a kernel of something worth fighting for. Page 56.2. Feel the charged memory emotion and go into a storyline that helps rationalize this energy. Would an example be, if you're scared as a child, can you carry the storyline with you into adulthood? Absolutely. And it becomes kind of a rationalization, if you will. And you can use several examples, but you feel a charged emotion of, say, jealousy. Say you grew up with very little money and the cool kids at school got the toys that you didn't get. And so you resented that. You wanted to be loved, and you misplaced that association of love and attention with, physical consumption, and saying, look, the haves and the have-nots and all the kind of stupid things that happen in a capitalistic society to make you feel like you need shit, right? And you rationalized it in whatever way you did. You averted it. You moved away from it. You became who you are. And now Susan at the office just came in with this gorgeous purse. And you love that purse, but you feel that feeling of jealousy. And so you move away by creating a rationalization, being like, oh, that's Susan, she's so materialistic, or she's so insecure. And you start creating all these storylines about Susan to rationalize why she got that purse, but you shouldn't get that purse. And all the while, you really think that purse is sweet, but you have this huge narrative drawing up in your brain, because what it's doing is it's invoking that jealous child who didn't, feel adequate, and using a series of rationalizations in this complex array of architecture in your own psyche to make that jealousy okay by putting it on someone else. And so, the moral of the story here is breathing into that feeling that you have, and releasing Susan, releasing yourself, releasing the purse, releasing all of it, and realizing where that came from. And on the other side of that is real liberation. That's when you're well, right? It's when you've moved through that. Page 56.4, we feel it, we forgive it, we allow it to heal. How do you know when you really forgive? The answer to that usually is that there's no charge there anymore. Like you don't feel like, I need to forgive this, right? It's just when all you feel for that person, that place, that time, that event is love. And there's just no attachment. Like you can feel the memory, and you there was a history there. There was a huge, car accident, and someone came in and mopped up the blood and swept up the shards and the glass. but you don't have that like agony. You don't have that feeling of just, ugh, every time you drive by that place, right? And the same thing with every emotion is, is there something there or isn't there? What do we need to do to transition to the point where I'm free of this? And any advice for a few of us who are masters of holding a grudge, you want to forgive but feel unable to? Go back to the essence of where you think this came from, where these feelings came from. Just really trace back in your psyche, trace back into the events that you think might be leading into this, and really start to uncover who it is that you really need to forgive. And maybe it's mom, maybe it's dad, maybe it's your brother, who knows? And work on forgiving the kind of the core original event. Work on feeling the original wound and healing that, and realizing that who you really can't forgive is either that person or yourself or something else. And this poor person who just walked into your life and did this thing and is getting like, both horns, they don't deserve that. And what you're doing is you're putting the weight of some much heavier trauma into this little infarction that is now kind of directing the flow of energy in your life. So go back to the smoking gun and heal that, and then that forgiveness becomes way easier, I would say. Trans is the way of our culture. Then you talk about TV, politicians. Are you talking about subliminal messages that are put into our thinking? Yeah, absolutely. There are teams of neuroscientists that work on commercials. I've been to a lot of these conferences. They know what color makes your brain light up. They know what kind of smell makes you work. They know what kind of image invokes, insecurity. They know more about you than you think. They probably know more about you than you know going into this game. And it becomes an incredibly challenging position to be in, realizing that you're actually taking arrows all the time, and realizing that the world out there is trying to entrap your psyche and trying to entrap your consciousness into a place where you're an idiot, blind consumer, and that is where they want you. So yeah, absolutely. Vote red, vote blue, buy this Toyota, real men drive this truck. It's all bullshit. And so, an urban monk steps out of that. Sometimes you think you forget them, and months later, anger and bad feelings come back up out of blue, and you begin to feel sad, angry, and all those feelings all over again. Herbally, yeah, and that's when you go back and, God's presented you with another opportunity to keep healing this thing. And you keep going and you keep going and you keep healing it every time you see it, and you love it and you bless it and you forgive it. And you keep finding more and more places where you are disconnected from the essential truth of the universe because you're holding a grudge and you're holding something between you and true love. I never said this game stops. I just said you got to keep digging, and I don't make the rules. Be hypervigilant throughout your reading of this book and everything else, for life for that matter. Please elaborate on that, Pedrums. Sometimes I feel like I get this stuff and sometimes I don't. Any tips on good ways to start? What sort of things to start on? What has helped your successes? What has helped your successes get started the most? It's usually the heavy shit, man. It's usually where you're like, man, that girl really pisses me off, or I'm just so uncomfortable around that person. And then the question is why? It's usually the places where you trip up. I can't believe I did that thing again. I can't believe I slept with that girl. I spent that money. I said that thing to my spouse. The places where you trip up is usually, the big chunky stuff that leads to the deeper stuff, that leads to the important stuff, that leads to the big wounds that we move away from as fast as we can because they suck. They don't feel good. They bother you, and they're just uncomfortable to feel. And that's where I would say start, and just keep doing your qigong to kind of kick up the dust and just know how it feels to feel good, and just in your meditation, so that you become hyper vigilant, and as something comes up, you can become aware of it, and you become aware of how here's your homeostasis, and this thing is knocking you off your perch. And you go, what is this thing? What is this thing? Where am I going? And then you could follow the breadcrumbs to some of the deeper learning and the important stuff that comes from that. We talk about being present in the present moment. Being in the present moment creates an honesty in ourselves. What's the best way to do that? Look, the easiest way to be in the present moment is to anchor in on the breath. That's why most meditation uses it, because it's something you got to do all the time. And it connects you with your body. It connects you with the present moment. Everyone right now, just stop and breathe for 1 second. Just deep breath to your lower abdomen. Feel that space opening and closing. And understand that that's the tether, that's the place that you can use to anchor back in to this moment right here and now. Start there. Could you elaborate on the subject of polarization? I still have trouble understanding the concept when it comes to cravings. About attachment to pain, it sounds like pain can be both an aversion, who in the right mind likes pain, and a craving. As a child, you got attention when your parents only knew when they're sick, and therefore in order to get more attention, you get sick as possible. How does the polarity work in such case? So I would say that in the second example there, and this is a great distinction, is what you're craving is attention. And you're using pain, or you're using the facade of illness as a gateway into, or a narrative or a story into craving attention. Whereas an aversion of pain is like, every time I'm abandoned, it brings back, every time I'm alone, it brings back that feeling of abandonment I had when my dad left. And so I avoid being alone because it makes me feel abandoned, right? So you move away from something, whereas, craving, you just want it. And so even if it's pain, what you're actually doing is you're powering the craving of attention. I hope that makes sense. Good, Sandra, good. Last week you talked about the importance of not feeding someone's childhood dramas. What if you're on the other side of the fence? Like a lot of women, I have this pattern. I see my father, a lot of men, especially those in authority, including my poor spouse. I search for the attention validation my father never gave me, and I feel easily hurt and inadequate. I find it incredibly difficult to be aware when it happens, because the shadow does take over. Last time it happened, my spouse made me realize I was having father issues. Instead of running away, I sat with it for a while and let myself feel it. Tears came, and I kept wondering how long I'd have to feel it before the charge gets released. How do you resolve and release such a strong charge without having to sit and feel it for weeks without pause? That's a great question. That's a great start. And it sounds like you got a great spouse. And so, have them call bullshit on you and be like, hey, have a code word, something that you don't say normally, like pineapple, right? And that's like your word that says, hey, I think that this is an actual daddy issue that you're projecting onto me. So let's sit with this and let's call attention to it. And let's just hold it out in the open and say, okay, I understand that this is a thing. I understand that I'm doing that thing again. And we understand that this doesn't serve our marriage. So I apologize for projecting that on you. And let's talk about it. Let's just sit with it. And it'll excuse me. One of the things that becomes a challenge in this space is people think that they're like, okay, I identified this and now I'm just going to breathe through it and it's gone. Yay, I'm free. And, sometimes you just got to keep digging. Sometimes you got to keep building out circuitry so that your psyche understands that there's a different place to go. And so then maybe the next time you become a little more aware of it and you don't judge it. It's like, oh yeah, that's that daddy thing again, right? And so you just stop and you go, yeah, that's what it is. And so the next time it comes up, you can catch it a little earlier. It's just like meditation. You just catch it a little earlier. Instead of like turning around and like unloading into your poor spouse, you go, wow, you just pineapple, you just triggered a pineapple thing. And he's like, hey, thanks for, not punching me in the face this time. That was cool. And then you just get better and better at it. And over 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, all of a sudden you start to see that you have some traction and it's just better, right? And so I would say be patient with it, be honest with it, be open with it, and enroll your spouse or your friends or whoever else you can to help you catch it. And then you have an opportunity to heal it. And it doesn't happen overnight. And just be patient with yourself. Look, love your imperfection and work through that. Don't think that, oh, man, there's that imperfection again. I thought I had breathed through that stuff and I thought I was perfect and now I'm imperfect again and I'm just such a loser. That's what we all do. And that's bullshit. And that's a misappropriation of these techniques because we want them to go away. So if you find yourself wanting them to go away and just being like, I have an aversion to this neurosis that I have, think about that, right? It's just another aversion and craving. Understand that it's all okay and understand that we're all crazy, and then you can just get through it easier and just work with your spouse and just understand how really what's happening here is you're coming to awareness, and then you're like, I had this moment of clarity in my meditation, so now I'm just pissed off that I'm not that enlightened all the time. That's what we do with this stuff, right? It crosses over, and it's an unfair expectation of ourselves. So I would say, soften up, man. Just go with it. Last question. What is the function of art in the process of shining the light of awareness? I'm wondering it by expressing your pain, painting, medium you choose. You're feeding the charge rather than releasing it. I would think that it depends on your attitude towards it. If you're identifying with the pain, you're feeding it. Whereas if you can detach yourself and you release it, this line must sometimes be very fine between the two. What do you think? Look, I love artistic expression and using it as a means to identify pain and address it and put it in front of you and not create this like demon and to run away from, but to like put it into some place, into some mode of expression where then you could have a rationalized understanding of what you do and have it invoke a pictographic symbol to then allow you to understand that this is your boogeyman and that you are not to run from it. But the beauty and the clarity and the healing is through this, right? So if you take what we've learned here and use that in your artistic expression, it becomes an incredibly therapeutic path to creating symbol linking in your psyche and in your consciousness to then allow for a bridge to be like, aha, this is part of my healing. And this is where I understand I have been stuck my entire life. This is what I do, and this is my understanding of that kind of repetitive cycle of trauma and drama. And now that I've kind of called it out and put it in front of myself and my psyche and the world, if you will, if you choose to share that art, I'm going to use this as a means, as a reminder. It's why, monks wear malas and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, shit, I should breathe, right? And it's like, oh yeah, there I am, crazy again. And so I'm going to use this as a reminder to anchor me back into my higher self, my higher awareness and my better judgment of this situation so that I'm less likely to go there, right? I hope that answers that question. Cool. 6 o'clock and I've hit all the questions. That sounds pretty good. How is this in terms of technology? How is this in terms of pacing for you guys? I'll wait for the answers. I'm just waiting for a couple things to come in. Okay. There we go. Good. Technology and pacing were great. Good, 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 good. Thank you. Good. Chapter 3 next week. Lee, thank you for all this, by the way. I can't thank you enough. Pages 62 through 69. I pick up a few of today's topics and put some on discussion. Y'all do that in the Facebook group. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Sandra, Lainey, Gary. Oh man, Gary, it ain't easy. Actually, yeah, I took a punch because I stayed up late and got a sore throat and all that, so I'm just kind of recovering now. Yeah, cool. So I love it. I love this format. I think we've got the technology locked. My mouth to God's ears here. I'm gonna go home and see my family, and I'm off to some sort of surprise something this weekend. So hopefully it'll be restorative, and then I will be back with you next week. Again, it's either gonna be let's just shoot for Thursday night again next week, and I'll talk to Wendy about it in the morning. And then I think the following week, well, I don't need to think anything. I have the internet in front of me. Then the following week, we go back to Wednesday the 5th, because then I won't be in clinic. So I think that'll work just fine. Cool. All right, I'm signing off. I'm going to go get some sending thanks, Julie, and sending love to all of you, and I hope this was useful, and much love. I'll see you next week.